Let's have an opening salvo. As for a question, how much men talk about what they know? Perhaps we'll get back to that. First, in my equation of I plus not I equal everything, I'm going to refine it again and point out to you that not I is not simply out there. And a way that I have generally talked about it, and the way in which you have accepted it all this time, at times you have thought about it, seemed clear enough. It would be consciousness, your own sense of I, saying everything consists of me, the observer, and that which I'm observing. That I plus everything outside of my skin, everything else, I plus not I equals everything. But there is a specific way that this is also an internal lesson. That not I, the same basis of that equation of whatever it is I in you saying, agreeing with, thinking it sees, that yes, I plus not I equals everything. It's not simply a one-order equation of I plus everything out here, not I equals everything. It's in here is I, whatever I is saying that, plus not I. That is, all the parts of we, and here there's not the me talking. Put that all together, and you've got another everything. You have another everything that I submit to you may be as important for a revolutionist as what appears to be the so-called physical universe. Because it may be interesting to read about other galaxies. But what have you got to deal with? You got to deal with getting on the freeway of giving gap and taking gap without being arrested, without feeling as though you have entered into a perverted act. You have got to deal with a mate. You have got to deal with the IRS. You got to deal with you. You could imagine the feeling internally of an I plus a not I equaling everything, the entirety of we. You could see, you could feel, you could look at the I stating the equation as apparently being the one which is more acceptable, which is more familiar, and the not I that would be in the internal equation would be that which is not as acceptable and it is not apparently as comfortable to you. But put all of that together internally at any given time and you have got the entirety of everything. You have got every possibility, I say of you, you have got every possibility of a human being. But you have got every possibility of you in that equation. At any given time, under any circumstance, under any atmospheric pressure, under any cloudburst, is all you've got to do is be aware of the fact that right now, whatever seems to be I plus not I, everything in me that is not the I right now, adds up to equal everything. There is no more, there is no less. To depersonalize it, after all this time I have considered, and I'll go ahead and draw it, of dropping the I plus not I because everybody believes that they know what that means. Everybody believes at least they have their own standard, their own impression of what it is, and it could just be, I could have started out, or I could do it now, we just say, or Z, R. Has everybody got that? We could just call it that. But then think right quick, let me give you a couple of seconds. What if I'd said that was the equation a long time ago and talked about this and that all of this time? In the equation I didn't say I plus not I equals everything. It would have been A plus not A equals everything. But then I would begin to point out that A in some cases is representing you. Probably in the case that I'm talking about tonight, or in some past night. and then everything that is not apparently A. What difference would that have made? Well, sure, you might say none now, because I made it for you. But if it had not been personalized, and if it did not say I plus not I, then how would you have known that it would have equaled everything? Why would it apparently had any cogency to it? So let's pass that step. And what if we made it, how about yet another one? A, let that stand for active. Let that stand for what seems to be the most powerful. Me in your we. Of A plus, and A would also could equal actualization. And A plus P. And let P equal the more passive side. Let P equal the potentiality of whatever you could be. Of course, all of this would somewhere, if you notice, be drawing upon a third part that is unstated in this equation, this 3D equation, and that would be truly what would be the pool of the irrelevant. But if it was A plus P equals everything, if it was at any particular time, at any space, at any juncture, and it was some part of you that was apparently could get up speed enough to think and to speak to itself. And that said, all right, A plus P equals everything. The A would be that which was talking. The A would be that that seemed the most active, that seemed right there at that juncture as being the most powerful, because it's thinking for you, it's talking to you. It's the one that's coming up with its own variation or its own interpretation or its own recollection of my new interpretation of the equation. So that would be A. Then the P would be, relatively speaking, the passive. What in me right now that I'm seeing this equation, trying to fondle it, trying to handle it, trying to make some new sense out of it, trying to drain some new juice out of it, everything that's not participating. Hey, you mothers, all you people, you're P's. You're passive. You're less powerful, and you're nothing but a potential. Right now, I'm king. Right now, I am the ruler. Right now, I am A. Or back to when it was more personalized, right now, I am I. And of course, the people, as fast as things move in the city, if any of them paid any attention, all it takes is more than one to overcome you. But at least the crowd of them, if they decide they weren't going to overcome you, at least in the city, they would respond appropriately on such manners as like, who cares? Just because someone seems to be passive does not mean that they want to be active. Only psychologists believe that. Just because someone apparently is being dominated and may apparently even being enjoying their submission, their submissiveness, only psychologists believe that everyone who is being dominated wants to turn the tables. Everything that is not I, everything that would be not A in you, everything that would be P in you, ordinarily in the city, in the temples, in the psychiatrist's office, in the psychological clinics, it is believed that inside the not A, the not I, the P, is perfection, is a better life, is greater understanding, is a more sane, a more mentally healthy human being fighting to get out. And it's not true. If you're going that far, if you're that city bred, then you believe such things as if you unlock the doors, everybody in prison would escape. Not so. Or you'd believe that, hey, if we told everybody in the armed forces that, well, we fooled you when you said that this last time when you re-enlisted it was for 4 years, you can leave now. That they would all, if they'd been in there over 2 or 3 weeks and got a good glimpse of what that kind of life was, would all whip off their uniforms and rush for the exits? Wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. What seems to be the most active, what seems to be the most powerful, what seems to be the spokesman at any given time would apparently be that which had the greater weight from any lineal, from any reasonable, from any logical view, which is what you can participate in the city. Would that not be true? It only stands to reason. It would seem to be ergonomically, if not economically, dictated that, all right, whatever it is in me right now that seems to be in charge, there's got to be a reason. It must be because it belongs in charge. It must be that quality will out. It must be that cream does rise to the top. People that say that have never worked around cesspools, but we'll press on. It is believed in all quarters, it's not a mistake, it's the way things are, it's the way they should be, that that which seems to be in charge right now, that there is some logistical, economical, psychological, spiritual reason for that. And there is some reason for those parts of me that are weaker. And of course there is the belief then that this contrast is here for a purpose. Your forefathers believed this contrast is here for us to pay off a debt to the guides. And your semi-forefathers, I guess, believed that the contrast is here because of our unconscious minds and because of the psychological traumas that we have all suffered at the hands of our progenitors and even our Uncle Charlie. If you're going to be a revolutionist, you've got to understand that contrast is here primarily for the sake of contrast. We can further discuss it, which I have further discussed it already before the fact several weeks back. Contrast is here so that everyone attempts to become a reformer. And if they do so, they continue to waste energy because they are forever hopping from one foot to the other. That is why reformed people are loved. That is why everyone loves to be around a reformed person. It is so comforting. It instills one with a sense of achievement. It makes one aware of the fact that other people, or at least some people, can actually undergo some change and quit blanking, screwing, drinking, smoking, eating chocolate, sleeping too much. It's a pleasure knowing that they can. At least you forget it as they hop, which is what I let Kyroots. I'm telling you what he intended to convey. The hopping on one foot to the other continually is not simply a physical act using your pedal digits. I'm discussing something else that makes reformed people loved, cherished, and sought out from one corner to the other. So that is one area that you cannot forget, that the revolutionists have got to see, that the apparent contrast, that there is the basis for such an equation, that there is a basis internally in me at any given time, that is you, that apparently there is a passive part of me, a part that's not all that acceptable to me, a part that I'm not that familiar with, I'm not that comfortable with it when it seems to come around or it threatens to take over the king of the hill position for a few minutes, and then there is that I. As full of warts as it may be and overweight and it smokes too much and it drinks too much, I'm familiar with it. It seems to have more control. Of course, it is more than it seems to have control. If you are an ordinary person in the city, and if you are still walking around and they haven't locked you up, then you apparently have a rather stable, a rather predictable personality. It feels comfortable, and you have the sensation that it is the authority, that it is the strongest. But now see if we could take a semi-jump into a oblique direction from here. Let me ask you this. When a person, which this includes all persons of course, when a person has perhaps just a fleeting thought and feeling of I need to change, I need to lose some weight, I need to quit smoking, I need to quit drinking, or if it seems to be a long term, anywhere between those two apparent extremes. All right, we're dealing internally, without any doubt, with more than one electrical impulse. We're dealing with more than the sensation of there being a single person, a single entity, a single state of consciousness, a single personality, a single set of behavioral patterns that answers to your name. There has got to be more than one, or you're Looney Tunes, right? You'd be talking to yourself, and there is no other self. You'd be saying, hey, I've got to lose weight. And you'd be standing in a gully, you'd be standing in a 4D gully, or beside a ravine that did not have the ability to send back an echo. You would be absolutely 3D nuts. Of course, it's impossible not to be 3D nuts, but to talk to yourself and there not be a self. If you're a human and you've got all three circuits operating in any degree, then there is a we. There is the order of we in you. So you have got to take your choice of the many possibilities I just enumerated. Personalities different behavioral patterns, different sets of electrical impulses, there's obviously two things in you, because one of them's talking to the other one. Or as I said, you make planners look like if they never even went in the nut business. So there's two of you. Now what I'm getting at is this. Back to the equation of I plus not I, or A plus P equals everything. There apparently being a more active, a more powerful, and then a less active, and one that just seems to be more of a potential, one that seems to be less comfortable. All right. Which one is talking to which anytime you've got the thought that I need to change? Now, don't rush to judgment. Well, unless you're in Mark's fast lane. But don't be too hasty to decide. Of course, on the 3D level, there would not seem to be haste involved indeed to say, well, it's got to be the part of me that is more powerful. At least, I give you a choice of several adjectives. The part of me with which I am more familiar. The part that is more active, because it's the voice in me saying, hey, we should lose some weight. It's got to be, given those two choices, it's got to be that one. And then it is addressing the more passive one. The one that does not want to get up and exercise, the one that will lay there and turn into a Davenport Spud, watch TV. So it is, that's the one that I'm addressing, that other side of me. I mean, that's obvious. Say you to me, so press on. And I say I'll press on when I get good and ready. Anytime you're sure that it's obvious, well, hey, it's got to be the more active side talking to the more passive side. Anytime you're sure, be sure of this. You're just one step away from being reasonable. When you will be so weak as to take the obvious way out, it makes me, well, it's not ashamed of you. It makes me wonder why I've wasted all this time. Which part is talking to which part at any time you say, I should change, you plan to change. You acknowledge to yourself that I should be doing so-and-so, or I should be doing it differently, or I should not be doing it, whatever it is. Who is speaking for habit? Again, I point out to you, it would seem obvious there's got to be the better part of me, of you. It's got to be the more active part. It would have to be the I part in the I plus not I type equation, saying to the not I part in me, that is the not I part of me, the part I do not fully approve of, or I don't approve of as much. The part of me that continues to smoke, the part of me that continues to drink alcohol, the part of me that continues to take drugs, whatever. Pick out your own habit. So it's got to be the I part talking to the not I part. Next question. Press on. And I'm telling you, I ain't pressing on yet. Are you sure? If it was that simple, if that's the way it was, then a person attempting to change would jump from one foot to the other, from I to not I, from overweight to on a diet, to laying on the couch and no exercise to plenty of exercise. It would jump one time on one foot and that'd be the end of it. Am I not correct? Sure, I'm correct. I made it up, so I got to be correct. I can affect the outcome. Who is speaking for habit? How do you know what is habit? You would say, if you were city bred and you were speaking to me from the level of ordinary 3D consciousness, you would say, all right, it would be the I part of me. It would be the A part of me that was saying, hey, we need to quit smoking. We need to quit drinking. We need to quit whatever. And it would be the lazy part of me, that is the not A part, the P part, the not I part. It would be that part that if it was going to speak, that must be what you're getting at. That would have to be the part that would be speaking for habit. But does it? Does it say no? You know, when the I part of you, according to you, would say, if you people are still drinking, hey, I've got to quit drinking all this beer 7 nights a week. Who defends it? In you. If some part of you condemns it, who defends it? I'll wait. Da-da-dum. The not I part? If some part of you condemns a habit, there's no part of you that will defend it. It gets dangerously close in the 3D world, and I don't mean this literally, but it gets dangerously close for those crude bastards right out there in the midst of the populace of trying to find their own E. Because then they will try to skirt the subject. That is, they will not defend drinking beer 7 nights a week. Not if you've already attacked it. And I'm not attacking it, remember. I'm not saying that anyone should be concerned if they were drinking beer 7 nights a week and getting drunk. I'm not saying that that enters into anything. I'm just picking out obvious ones that happen every day out in the world. That some part of a person says, I'm becoming an alcoholic, if not one already. I should quit drinking. And they say that as they stop to buy that night's beer or booze or wine. And then I ask you, all right, if you got an I plus a not I, if you got a more powerful, more in charge part of you, and then a less active, a less desirable part, is the latter the one that's going to defend the habit? Remember, I'm trying to catch you up to where I am. And I'm pointing out to you that if some part of you condemns it, there is no part of you to defend it. But it'll skate around the edge of not defending the habit, but apparently going to say something about circumstance, the difficulty of breaking habit, the pressures on you, and it's almost searching for an e-hole to distract the pressure of this contrast so that all you do is continue to hop from one foot to the other. And no part is called upon, either the I or the not I is called upon to exert any new pressures on the other part. The balance of energy, the balance of power between these two superpowers in you stays the same. All of this ends up in the admirable result, of course, that nothing changes. I knew a lot of you would be pleased to hear that. You'd always hoped that was true, and thus far you'd find it to be true. It's still true. A little connected to last week, last meeting. I was pointing out that a man's describable problems are not something he owns. He is actually unconscious, unknowingly silhouetting himself, describing himself. Part 2. Continued. I want to point out that last meeting I used the example, what little I spoke about this, I stayed almost entirely with the example of a man talking about, ooh, here I am again in an ill-fated love affair. I want you to understand. I want to try and make it clearer. The fact that a man's problems are him, that these so-called problems do not in any manner have to be as specific as that kind of example of an ill-fated love affair. I just started out with specifics, which is always in order in the city. But I want you to understand that very general statements of a person describing how throughout their life they have been cheated. And they can tell you instances all of the way from some little league game when they were 12 years old to what happened in college, something that happened to them, their first business experience, their third business experience, their first marriage, their third marriage. And they do not see any relationship between what they describe. Or they point out to you, just sit around casually and they'll come out, or they could begin to almost detail it in a regimental fashion of how they have continually throughout their life been misused, betrayed. And if it's between ordinary people in the city, one person will talk and another person will listen, and oftentimes will chime in with some agreement like, well, I know what you mean, I've had the same thing happen, and gee whiz. But they still, in the city, accept the fact that they are talking about something, that they're talking about something outside the man. They're talking about something that happened to him. What happened to him was his life. So jump from such specifics as an instant, ill-fated love affair. How about a man who once he starts talking, you say, my, my. Then you have another cup of coffee and talk about something. Maybe it's your turn. And then he says, of course, this is not as bad, to tell you the truth, I don't believe, as last year. You never did meet Betty, did you? No. Well, let me tell you what she did. So he tells you that. Then you order another round of coffee and you talk a little bit. He says, of course, Betty was nothing. I mean, if you'd met her sister, you know, you knew I was going with her sister for two. Well, no, you didn't. Well, let me tell you. And the man does not see. What would they call it in the city? Let me see. Ooh, it starts with a P. A pattern. That's what they call it in the city, a pattern. That's 3D terminology. I tell you what it is. Since I already told you, that's life. And you do not have to be named Sinatra or Anka to understand that there is not just a pattern. The man is describing his life. He's not describing Betty. He's not describing what Betty did to him. He's not describing what Betty's sister did to him. Or on back as far as you'll listen. The man is describing, as long as you'll sit there, he's describing himself. If a man tells you, which is almost as common nowadays in our great capitalistic society, instead of love affairs, there are people in the city that will sit around and describe the numerous entrepreneurial attempts they have made, wherein they got screwed by somebody, cheated by a bank, an unscrupulous partner, an attorney who swore he was going to get the patents and stole his idea. So he tells you one, and you listen. You order some more coffee, and you talk. And he says, of course, the money I lost, I just barely, that's where I met you. Anyway, I had opened this plastic company in Akron. That's where well, let me tell you about this. And he tells you about that, about how somebody screwed him good, somebody he trusted. So then you order some more coffee, and you talk a while. And then he says, of course, I saw you looking funny when I said about plastic business. You wondered how I went from being in real estate, to plastic business. But, all right, well, I'll tell you then. I used to live out in Oakland. That's when I was selling real estate. And I had this partner. And so he tells you that, about how somebody just absolutely stabbed him in the back, stole his money, left town, and he believes that he is talking about things that happened to him. The man is giving you a panoramic verbal view of him. He does not get betrayed. That's him. That's his life. That's his purpose. He does not get cheated. That's him. Right quick, I'll make one final jump, I think, before I leave this paragraph. If you can hear this, he doesn't get cheated. And he's not a man that is cheated. It's not even that simple. He's a man who describes his life as being, I was cheated. But they do not raise him in the city to be conscious of that. You don't get born in the city and come out of the city thinking like that. There ain't no school, ain't nobody to talk to, and ain't no cultural, religious, intellectual pressures that will make you come out of the city thinking like that. Can't be done. And of course, in the city, you can't really think like that, because it will give you severe, well, for me to talk about somebody being of the city, somebody being of the people, capital P, like I have been doing here of late. Everyone, of course, understands that I am talking about, when you are of the city, it is an attitude, and not really just what you immediately, I think, most of you connotate the word attitude like some kind of psychological, intellectual. That's all right. But how about you pilots? It's a certain attitude that is inherent with being of the city. It's a certain posture toward things. That's to be of the city, because it's not necessarily, it can be, but it's not necessarily, when I use it, a reference to a physical locale, an attitude, a certain leaning. And everybody's got an attitude. In the city, everybody's got an attitude. You were born with an attitude. And in the city, there are only 3 attitudes available. The 3 big R's. Make it easy to remember. It just fits itself in. Only in the city, you've got one of these 3 attitudes. The 3 R's is resignation, resentment, or accommodation. That's rapport. Now I got resentment, resignation, resentment, or rapport. I said 3 R's, so I'll live with it. I really wanted to say accommodation. This covers every available. As always, if you care to, if you're tired of crossword puzzles and tired of your own brain, you can try to find some exception. But they will all fit into those categories. Everybody was born, of course, in the city, people believe, by and large, in the more sophisticated areas of the city, in those neighborhoods, they believe that it's mostly a matter of cultural influences, personal influences, that make their attitude. So they can think anything they hell want to. But everybody was born with, they end up with, an attitude that fits into one of those 3. They are either resigned, that is people that, hey, that's the way things are, que sera, that's life, and they don't even care to talk about it. And it's not necessarily overtly hostile, but it's just resigned. What you going to do? The second attitude is resentment. Nowadays it goes under names like stress. But it is those who apparently resent. Fill your menu. They resent themselves, they resent being alive, they resent everybody else, they resent the whole aspect of their being in existence. They're just resentful. The third group, rapport, are those that apparently are fairly well accommodated to life. They're those that apparently are, well, just observably seem rather successful in life, or perhaps real successful. Leaders, captains of finance, the big boys, the rich folks. Those that do not seem resigned, they'll get out there and they'll work their young asses off to get elected to some office. They'll work their young asses off to get rich. They're not resentful. If they had any comment to make, if somebody talked about resentment, their attitude would be, listen, hell, I could be mad. I could be resentful. My father went off and left me when I was a little baby. But I'm too busy. I don't have time for that. You'll never be successful being resentful. Write that down. So you've got the spectrum of 3 attitudes, and you were born with one of them. You grew up with one of them. One of them dominates in everybody to the point that they can be identified by it. And it's not that they do not experience other sides. That is, other attitudes. It's somebody that if I were to say, all right, you're right, that person is primarily resentful. But there would be other times that apparently, under certain conditions, parent conditions, they would just sort of be resigned. And that you couldn't see much resentment. Or if you said, boy, I bet that makes you mad, then you go, oh, like I'm too tired to be mad today. I've been pissed all day, and give me a break. It's 5:30, I'm off duty. Or at other times, they might have short periods that they seem to be in rapport with life. Things seem to be going well. Of course, that's short-lived. Somebody's going to come along and screw them. But at any rate, everyone could be identified by one of those, that would seem to be the focus, it would seem to be the core of their attitude. All right. Now I want to point out, try to do something a little more specific. What seems to be the way people feel. You can never free yourself from what seems to be ordinary moods of whatever nature, just the moods that afflict everyone alive, that will afflict everyone in the city until they die. And by moods I include everything such as your problems, that I am mistreated, I'm cheated, I'm betrayed, I continue to fall into ill-fated love affairs, ill-fated business ventures, I dream, and as soon as I try to execute, I get... That seems to produce in you moods. There is no way that you will ever free yourself from ordinary moods, whatever yours are, if you allow yourself, if you permit yourself only one of those three city-bred attitudes. You cannot free yourself if you permit yourself to have only a feeling toward how you feel that fits into one of those categories. Now please hear, I've shifted it now from the general attitude that these people in the city have toward life of either feeling resentful, resigned, or in rapport with life in general. I'm now talking about how you feel about your feelings, how you feel about your moods, or if you insist, how you feel about these not so hot things that happen to you, if you don't want to call them problems. These little inconveniences, these irritants, these spurs under your saddle. The way you feel toward these feelings, toward these moods, can never change at all. There is a scientific basis to this. There's a mathematical basis that I'm not even going to try to go into, even if I knew what it was. Nothing can change vis-a-vis the way you feel about your feelings if the way you feel is limited to one of those three attitudes. And your feelings, try and listen, now that I've gotten into this, I know it sounds verbally sticky. But your feelings toward the way you feel is the glue. It is the energy that binds them to your mass. I fear that got a little too complex verbally, but ordinary people would feel as though, they would think as though, if they dissected just verbally what I said, that the only thing that's important is the way you feel, if we're talking about feelings in particular. That what's important, of course, if we're going to talk about feelings, is how you feel. No. It's not. That would be true if there was no contrast. That would be true if you were one entity. That if I equaled everything, or not I equaled everything. But as long as there's contrast in every person, the way you feel is not what matters. What matters is the way you feel about how you feel. That's the difference. And that is not an absolute pristine description, but I have gone into the area that is outside the city. I have gone into an area that you've got to get past even space and time, and it's off in another direction. But some of you should be able to at least see that it's going somewhere unusual. It's not the way you feel. It is not your mood. It's how you feel about the feel. But in the city, that is not interpreted as being a reality of any sort. Or it would not be, I guess, as they would say on the coast now, it would not be analyzed as being any sort of viable reality. In other words, it sort of makes sense what you're saying, but, you know, what difference does it make? What we're dealing with people's feelings. We got to find out what caused them to feel like that. We got to talk it out. There's nothing to talk out for the revolutionist. The revolutionist has a mood. The revolutionist has a feeling. What the hell? He was born in the city. He has one. And of course, the revolutionist, if he was off on a real roll, he might say, you know, so what? Who cares? But you're talking about somebody that would then be beyond the realm of a pretty fresh-faced recruit or enlistee. And so, for a while, this would-be revolutionist is faced with the fact that as astounding as this seems to be, as interesting as it seems to be, as convinced that to the bushes I was born, to this activity I was born, I still wish something could be done about the way I feel about these ungodly moods of depression I get, of just abject fear overwhelms me and always has. At unexpected times, I see no reason for it. It is not the feeling. It is not the mood. I know it seems to be, and it's real enough. It's how you feel about it, and nobody ever looks at it that way. They can't in the city. It's not the mood that bothers you, it's the way you feel about the mood. And how do you feel about these bad moods? Well, I don't like them. There you are. Except you can't go in the city. You can't get into a psychiatrist's office and hide behind a couch and get them to lead the patient up to that point to say, all right, what is it that bothers you about your mood? And they say, well, the mood. You say, no. And then you jump out and holler, no, it's not. It's how you feel about the mood. And they go, now I see. Now I see. No, they don't. They'd call for some help for you. It's how you feel about the mood. You have always got this apparent dichotomy in city consciousness. There's got to be an I plus a not I, or the more depersonalized, an A plus a not A, or an X plus a not X. I guess X maybe even seems more impersonal, doesn't it? Is X plus not X equals everything. There is no everything in city consciousness, in 3D consciousness, without a contrast, without there being two parts. So to say, for an ordinary person to say, I'm depressed, all right, we got one part. We got an X or a not X. I don't care which one you think it is. But then you got not simply that I'm depressed. Then you got the unasked question. Forget unanswerable question. The city, they can't even ask the right question. The question then is, well, how do you feel about being depressed? And what little sense that makes in the city just shows that you make no sense. Well, what do you mean, how do I feel about it? You know how I feel about it. I don't like it. Again, you can't jump up and holler, aha. Because in the city, they'll jump back and go, ha-ha yourself. I may be crazy, but you're crazier than I am, and you don't know it. There's got to be the two parts. And so nobody ever works at it from this angle. It's not a flaw in evolution, it's just the way things are. That everybody, let's say, everybody. And my jokes about Buddhas and Jesuses and Confuciuses that I bet off in their spare time, or I made jokes that, boy, I bet some of them were manic depressive, some of them were alcoholics, who knows what. It's not an attempt at a cheap laugh at some so-called spiritual figure back in the histories of the cities. And it's not necessarily that I'm trying to hint to you that I know something specific, although I do. I hint. The thing is, everybody that's born in the city has feelings. Anybody that has feelings sometimes feels bad, as it's called. So, it is not a matter of saying, well, now that I am involved with this great heroic cosmic struggle, I shouldn't have any more feelings. No. You're going to have to wait until you join up from the enlisted men up. I'll wait till I see you with some stars or with some eagles or something on your shoulder and you gathered around the campfire with the rest of, I started to say us, with the rest of me. But until then, it's not a matter of saying, well, I don't have any feelings. Hell yeah, you do. Or it's not simply a matter of saying, well, as much as he has laughed and made fun of this, God, I even feel worse. Times when I wake up in the morning and I'm depressed. Used to I felt depressed and bad, but now I feel even worse about it because he keeps laughing at it, making it sound like it is. Who cares? And I try to even do that to me. And sometimes it seems to work, and I'll go in the mirror and I'll stick my tongue out and I'll say, oh, poor little you. Sometimes it seems to work. Sometimes I have to take an aspirin. Sometimes I think, ooh, what if I did get a half pint of Jack Daniels? Any chance he'd see me going in the liquor store? What you cannot do, what you would never discover, what you can't even do with ordinary weapons, is to simply look, the great look method, that the way you feel, really, is somewhere in the E zone. The way you feel is not A, is not A. How you feel is not C, it's not D. It could be either one. It doesn't have to be either one. It's like a hologram. It could be both. It's not how you feel, it's how you feel about how you feel. It's how I feels about not I at any given time. It's how not I feels about I. It's how X feels about not X. All right, then you start to get a glimpse of that. Some of you have in the last 5 minutes when you're going through this. You're getting some shotgun glimpses of it. But even that's not enough, because then if you simply approach it, try to look at it, try to study it, try to remember it, under the auspices, within limitations of one of the 3 city attitudes, postures, viewpoints, being resigned to it, well, all right, so if that's the way it is, I'm glad you explained it to me. I didn't explain anything. I didn't succeed. I didn't help you a bit. Just to say, well, now that you explain it that way, I see that it doesn't matter how I feel, everybody's going to feel bad, including all my spiritual heroes. Everybody's going to feel bad, so when I feel bad, I just go, hey, I feel bad. No. No help. Won't help a bit. You cannot be resigned. You can't be resentful. You cannot be in rapport with life. Those attitudes, as I've described, the big 3 R's. If you are held, limited by one of those attitudes toward your feelings, then all you're doing is reinforcing the actual glue. This energy glues those apparent feelings toward your feelings to you, the mass, to the mass of we. There is no way out. You won't see anymore, you won't understand anymore, there is no freedom. To affect the way you feel about your feelings, you have got to escape the limitations of one or any combination of those 3 city attitudes. Or else the way you feel about your feelings will last forever. The feelings themselves are going to last forever, in case you didn't know that. The feelings are going to last forever. So just forget that. As long as you got a nose, as long as you're breathing, the feelings are going to last. What we're dealing with. Once you begin to try and get outside the city limits, once you even approach the bushes, get out in the free fire zone, it's no longer the feelings, it's your feelings toward your feelings. That can be changed. That is what the revolutionary jolt in your system is. That is the kind of molecular change that takes place that I've told you a hint around. It's not a matter of shutting up all the voices. It's not a matter of escaping all of the feelings that you were born with genetically. And then I try to hint a little bit about, yeah, but it's not the same. It's not like you go through the rest of your life suffering and in some way resigned to it. The rest of your life hearing these crazy voices, saying, well, it's not really me. It's not all that. It's not all that. The contrast has changed. More about the political climate and all these revolutionary subjects. There's a way in which you can see that even after early experience of freedom, read childhood, the people ultimately, remember who the people are that we're talking about now, the people will ultimately refuse to govern or control themselves. And they will absolutely seek out, demand, using city terminology, some power to order their lives and to free them from freedom. Read adulthood. Read apparent cerebral, electrical, psychological, apparent selection from the midst of the we's of finally one fairly active, relatively powerful, comfortable, acceptable I. You now have the tyrant of tyrants. But between where I started that sentence and the end of the wrap-up of tyrant of tyrants is a lot of territory. Again, it's not an evolutionary flaw in man. It's not that we have fallen from grace, from some pristine innocence of childhood into our despicable state of adulthood. But it is this, that it can be seen, it fits nicely, to say the very least, into parables and allegories having to do with the body politic, the state, with the apparent 3D city development of each individual. That is, of starting out, and there is relative freedom at the earliest of ages, that children get by with murder. Of course, literally, they can almost get by in murder until the state decides that you are legally of a chronological age that we can hold you responsible for taking a human life. But at any rate, kids got freedom, relatively speaking. Jump up and down, jump on their head, fall out of trees. Everybody says, don't do that, and you run immediately and do it. They tell you, don't do it in your pants, and you do it in your pants twice as often. All that. There just seems to be freedom. There seems to be freedom, relatively speaking, to holler anything, say anything, stick anything you can in your mouth, spit it out. Now, along the way, of course, all this is a gradual process, and it's not even this linear. But the way it seems, then even you begin to develop a little yellow brain, and you begin to talk, and somebody says, what are you going to be when you grow up? And you holler, a fireman. No, an astronaut. No, I want to be a dancer. You know, all just as fast as I did. And they all seem as valid to you, if you could remember it, that each one of them seems valid, even if it just takes a split second. Somebody say, did you like your a dancer? You know, all just as fast as I did. And they all seem as valid to you, if you could remember it, that each one of them seems valid, even if it just takes a split second. Somebody say, did you like your sister's birthday party yesterday? Oh, I loved it. Oh, I hate her. Boy, she drives me nuts. Where are all the other kids? I wish they'd come back. Boy, if they come back, I'll whip them. I'll throw cake at them. There seems to be a kind of vague, unspecified, it's not called that in this sense, area that is relative, era, and area, floating through what is normally referred to as childhood, that there is a kind of freedom. But please note, all you got to do is think back in your own nervous system, conjure up your own genetic memory. There comes a time, and I would suggest to you that most of you, I don't know whether you can remember it or not, that most of you had some experience, some overt three-dimensional experience that would even, I could say, all right, there is when it should have struck you. That's not what caused it, but that's when it seemed, if you had the right kind of view of it, and if you had the right kind of memory now, I could say this should be the kind of, in a sense, when your little squinty eyes began to open in a certain way on a certain subject, and the time was that you suddenly felt like, I need help, I need direction, I want my mommy. You might have been 12, you might have been 15, you might have been 21. I need a counselor. I need a student advisor. Here I am, a sophomore. It's registration day, and I don't know what the hell to take. I know I told them back in freshman I signed up as pre-med, but there's not a chance in the hell I'm going to med school if I wanted to. What do I do? Call my mother, call my father. Get me an advisor, a vocational counselor. Maybe I should go back to church. Maybe I should return to my religion. There is in all people, finally, almost a day. It's not that instant, but there's almost a day, almost an occurrence, if I could conjure it up in your system, that what happened was your people, your we, the people in your state, it was like, release me from this freedom. Somebody set my life in order. Somebody tell me what to do. It is not uncommon, especially if you women don't know it, for young boys, teenage boys, themselves to say it or to be encouraged by their fathers or by some advisor or by a priest or rabbi, that they will say, son, I've listened to your problems and the kind of jams you've been in. Why don't you go and join the army? And it'll make a man out of you. Give you a few years, it kind of settle down. It'll give you some sense of discipline. And as from one viewpoint, you women and you draft dodgers that don't know about it, as despicable, all right, let's put it, as unpleasant as certain aspects of military life can be, there are young men that, for whatever reason that they would describe at the time, would seem to take to it and go, yeah, you're right, that's what I'll do. I just speak now as a strong example, or I could say, I don't know whether any of you can follow this, the possibility that a boy, a girl even nowadays, here or there in the city, as an alternative to join the service, might go out and hold up a bank at noon. The bank, a bank that's next door to a precinct, and come up in a cab. In other words, psychologists in their wisdom in the city might later look at this case and discuss it with colleagues for a while and decide it's almost as though that child, that young boy, wanted to be caught. That's the city for you. It is a demand. It is a refusal on the people's part to any longer put up with what amounts to, relatively speaking, unconditional freedom. They insist that someone has got to put my life in order. Someone has got to bring me under some yoke of discipline. Someone has got to give me directions. Someone, some power, some entity has got to release me from this freedom. That's not, of course, the way it's said. That's not the way it's thought about. And that's not the way it's felt. But I have got to be released from this lack of control. I got to be an adult. Somebody got to whip me into shape. Even if it's in a cell block and all the time bitching. Even if it's in the service and all the time me bitching. When it gets down to that level, people will do whatever it takes to be freed from freedom, from that kind of freedom. If they have to go to jail, if, even worse, they have to join the damn army, become RA, or become a damn monk, or whatever would be the worst in your opinion. All right. In the city, as I'm trying to convey to you, not only is this absolutely natural, it is predictable, it is inescapable. It is, from one viewpoint, a description of growing up, really, of becoming a sane, civilized, so-called fairly productive member of the city, of the community. That's what I'm describing. So from that view, for all general purposes of life in the city, it is absolutely unavoidable, it is absolutely necessary, and it is predictable. But to the revolutionist, as natural and as predictable as this is, as inescapable as it is for his or her original days in the city, this arrangement spells doom, destruction to the ruled and the ruler. To I plus not I, which is what we're talking about in the internal state. Between X and not X. Between A and P. It's not doom. It's not destruction, or if those terms strike you as too strong. Severe inconvenience. Serious misstep in the apparent march to some revolutionary activity or battlefield. It would not simply be doom or destruction or a bad move looked at from the viewpoint of the ruled, that is, the people saying, hey, somebody whipped me into shape. It spells equal bad news to the apparent ruler. Now this is what cannot be seen in the city. Because then what it's saying, to right quick, since that seemed to be a little too complex, if we were using psychological terminology as an approach, it would be that not only are those unconscious, those undesirable, those condemnable, those passive, those weak, those almost uncontrollable parts of me, not only are they the ones to be ruled, what psychology would say are the better parts of me, the more conscious parts, the more civilized parts. They should be more fully in charge. That's what analysis is about. That's what psychological counseling is about. From the revolutionary viewpoint, now back in the city, that's all fine. From a revolutionist viewpoint, the destruction, the danger, the damage is done not only to the ruled, the not I, but it is equally done to the ruler. That is, the apparent what? Good parts of me. The real I's. Which, of course, in the city is insanity. It is not so. It sets up a condition. It sets up a condition of civilized, city-bred, natural, linear, 3D, horizontal stability. That is, if you still pass for sane in the ordinary sense back in the city. That in you seems to be a fairly stable, predictable what? Personality. An I, a me. And this thing, I've got other bad, I don't know what they call them, habits. I got potentials. I got dangerous potentials in me. I got a terrible temper. I could be a murderer, I guess. I could hurt people. I'm not all that civilized in a certain area, but I don't know, going through the service, being arrested that once as a juvenile, spending some time in jail, talking to a priest, having my father return home, whatever seemed to be the circumstance, becoming an adult. Apparently now I have most of that under control. I mean, I seem to have outgrown a lot of it. I don't drink as bad as I used to. That must have helped. But now there seems to be, thank God, sort of a ruler in me. And then there's that parts of me that must be ruled, that I must overcome, that I must keep control over. In the city, that's the way things are supposed to be. To the revolutionist, that kind of stability is destruction. You're finished. You can't move. You are in the position, as you should be, that you favor one over the other. Something else related. If I were to use the time-honored ancient description that all this kind of activity that I've been igniting and fueling, if I use the time-honored ancient description and say this is all a search for the truth, if I were to go along with that kind of description, then I would have to tell you this, that kind of ancient honorable description of this being a search for the truth is somewhat of a verbal misdirection, because then I'd have to tell you I got two good choices. I'll go ahead and give you the more direct one first. I would have to tell you this. It's not really a search for the truth, because everybody has seen the truth. They didn't like it and they forgot it. The real revolutionists, the difference is, the real revolutionists did and didn't. My alternative, that really covers it, but I like my alternative I thought of. That if I were to use that time-honored description of this being a search for the truth, I would have to caution you, I would have to clean up the description and say, it's not really a search for the truth, because everyone, even in the city, everyone has seen the truth. They just weren't all that impressed, and they forgot it. Whereas the real revolutionist was and didn't. There's the difference. Whereas Kyroots was saying, the leader of that fictional church of That's Entertainment, the man who actually knew how life worked, said that he didn't actually, if I can remember it, something on the lines of he didn't actually learn the secret as though he were born knowing it, and it just took him a while for his eyesight to clear up and for it to become clear in his mind. All right, if you can follow this right quick. I could use that picture in what I'm saying now and say that everybody, like at the moment of conception or sometime weird, that everybody, if indeed the purpose of all this was to see the truth, whatever that means, it seems to satisfy just gobs of people in the city, that everybody once, maybe at the moment of conception, saw the truth, and then their little eyes closed, and they were born like little raw, naked, featherless birds, and it takes a few days, a few hours for their eyes to open. And when it does, then they believe, all right, we got to fly away and search for the truth, or I should be. And I'm telling you that everybody has seen, if that was the case, that this is a search for the truth. It's not a search because everybody has seen the truth. Long time back, some time back. Everybody's seen the truth, they didn't like it, and they forgot it. That's it. The real revolution is the difference, using this description. The difference is this. He did and didn't. He or she saw it. We're not just talking about the opposite of didn't like it. And then everybody else forgot it. And to say that he or she didn't forget it is to understate the case by a New York mile. They couldn't forget it. In some cases, it even seems that they try. That they drink not for the fun that alcohol should afford anybody, but it's like, I got to get over this shit. And I got to grow up. I got to quit worrying about some kind of secret knowledge or going to India or, Jesus, I got to snap out of this. I got to get myself a beer gut and a red-headed woman and some kind of group of bad habits and some bad chillins. Which I guess could be synonymous. Well, never mind. Of course, there have been stories similar to this floating around in mythology and religion, but since Kyroots brought up him claiming to have overheard the head of that church, those born to this, is why I got such a reaction off my description. It is as though, it's not true in the 3D sense, it's not true linearly, because this is not actually verbal, intellectual stuff that you ever knew. But it is as though it was stuff you knew, or stuff that you got a glimpse of once. And then something happened, like you were born, or somebody put your little eyes to sleep, or it's like you're surrounded by all the other birds at the moment of conception. And everybody got a glimpse of it, and as far as you could tell, you were the only exception. It seemed as though whatever it was that people saw, all the little birds, that nobody liked it, and everybody took a little nap and then got born, and whatever it was they saw and didn't like, everybody forgot it, except you. You didn't forget it, plus you didn't not like it. That's why it is so strange, and that's why it is not so strange. That's why even when it's strange, it's still not all that strange sometimes. You feel like the little doggy in the RCA logo. And like I'm the big old speaker on that wind-up phonograph. And you're going, even when it's weird, it's not all that weird. I mean, it's so weird I don't know what he's talking about, but it's not even that weird. Well, I guess we'll have to see about that. I don't know. If anybody thinks I forgot the so-called opening salvo, I don't know why the hell you called it that, about why is it that men seem driven, made to talk about what they know. let me ask you this further. Is it possible to say something about something new, to say what it is without saying what it is not? Is that possible? Think about it for a second. Feel about it. Can you say something about something new? Can you say about this new something what it is without any reference to what it is not? Is it possible in the 3D world? Is it possible in the city to do that? And again, do not rush into the obvious, into the slimy, greasy jaws of the obvious. Is it possible? Then I ask you back to the opening. Why is it that why might life be arranged so that men are just absolutely driven to always want to say something about what they know anyway? Don't rush and let in the people in you say, well, what is a person to talk about? Well, you're saying that people should talk about what they don't know? I didn't say that. That's part of the slimy jaws of the obvious, is to rush into the likewise dangerous clutches of the jaws opposite, which you may fear the biting end of a tiger, but from one viewpoint, I wouldn't find the other end to be all that agreeable. But be that as it may. Speaking of opposites. Why might things be arranged for men to be driven to talk about what they know? Now, I was trying to cover any smart-aleck, resentful voices in your populace that might say, well, what else is somebody going to talk about? It's not that. You're sitting around, ordinary people in the city, coffee shops, salons, halls of Congress, privacy of their homes. People are driven to talk about what they know. What else do you talk about? The only other, right quick, to deal with any other voices, the only other possibility you got would be some kind of conversation that would apparently have to do with hard facts. How much of human conversation has to do with that? How much of human conversation are two people or a group of people sitting around, and what they're doing is conveying one person to another this brand new lengthy equation I just read that's fascinating, these new scientific facts. Well, hey, I found out exactly how to drive from here to Akron without getting on an interstate. Well, please tell me. And so for the next 3 hours, this one person says, well, first you would go up to State Highway 49, which is about 3 miles, and then you would take a left. And the first right is a 4-way intersection, stop intersection. Then you'd take a right, which would be State Road 107. And you would go on that for approximately 17 and a half miles. Imagine. The rest of human conversation in the city, what is taking place, human speech, is men and women, of course, talking about what they know. Now, of course, I'm being, as you have to in the city, magnanimous with what they know. It's what they believe they know, their opinions, or sometimes called their feelings when it comes out of their mouth. They're driven. If you sit around a few minutes at a counter at a Denny's with somebody, and a conversation starts, it now oftentimes will start on what apparently would be almost close to a factual area, such as the common ones over and over. Was it raining still outside? It looks like it's going to rain. Or they glance up at the TV. What do you think? Do you believe the Giants are going to do anything this year? All right. It seems to set almost like handing out an impartial foot mat that one person is welcoming the other person, like, would you like to step here up close to my door, and we might have a few minutes of conversation. And so it comes out the weather, ball game, Or, is your coffee cold? But then, within a split second or so, what happens? They begin to talk about what they know. They can't help it. It'll go from, if one man may say, what do you think of the Giants' chances this year of doing anything? The guy says, well, to tell you the truth, I don't even keep up that much with football anymore. And the first guy says, you know, I don't either. The more I realize, and there it goes. Well, I don't anymore. Used to in college, and here it comes. Or you might say, really? Well, you should pay more attention because, sports represents, and now you started. People have to talk about what they know. This is still, believe me, I can feel a bunch of you are not getting what I mean by know. I don't mean about facts. I don't mean about experience. I don't mean what they know as opposed to what they don't know. They're driven to open their mouth and talk. And what they're driven to talk about, what they're made to talk about, is what I know. No, we're not through yet. Because now, back to contrast. Everybody in the city is driven and made to talk about what they know. That is the basis of all conversation. That is the heart. That without that, there would be no human conversation. You would not talk in the city where you're not talking about what you know. So now back to the contrast. As always. As always until I say otherwise. Are men made to talk about what they know so as to contrast that with what they don't know? Listen quick. Are they made to talk about what they know all the time as to contrast it with what they didn't know previously? Or are they made to talk only, just almost exclusively, about what they know so as to contrast it with what others don't know? I suggest to you, in my magnanimous way, which is just cover talk for, that's the way it is, I suggest to you that all ordinary talk in the city, other than, as I said, the examples of what would really be the conveying between two organisms of what seems to be non-passionate information as road directions or equations or new scientific discoveries. But other than that, conversation, human talk, will fall into it being about what the speaker knows. And the three possible contrasts I gave you, the questions I was giving you, is it the contrast that the man's saying, well, all right, I'll take off on the football thing. Or we're saying, what do you think about the Giants? And the guy says, well, I tell you the truth, I don't keep up with football. And he sips his coffee. And the first guy says, I lost interest in football back in college myself. And then later I was reading some books on psychology or maybe sociology, and this doctor, somebody, was pointing out that a football game was just like a microcosm of the American way of life. All right, here's one possible contrast. The man is now, he's not talking about football. You see that. He's talking about what he knows. We're not talking about whether what he knows is correct, or we're not talking about whether what he knows is true, much less correct. But it's what he knows. He's not talking about football now. So here's one of the possible reactions to me asking you to consider those three possible ways that human speech may be working to contrast something. All right, so he starts out talking, and he is contrasting what he knows now with what he doesn't know, what he didn't know previously. Because he's saying, well, at one time I was like you. After I got through playing football in college or high school, once I got into college, I don't know, I lost interest in sports. So he's talking about there was a time I didn't know what I'm about to tell you. So he's contrasting. Now he's trying to encourage the guy that there's more to football than meets the eye, because now I know from reading, from having thought about it, whatever, that football is more than just a game out there. It is a reflection of the competitive spirit in man. So he is contrasting. Here's one possibility. He's contrasting. All right, I know this, and you don't know it. It's a contrast of, now I know this, but at one time I didn't know this. Now the one I've left out thus far was the first one I asked you, of a contrast between what I know, I'm telling you that I know, and that which I don't know. That, I'm not even going to make up an example for you, because that is the big bad wolf that eats everybody's grandmother. If you can't find that, you cannot find your own nose. What else would you talk about? What other contrast would always be available were it not the one that I'm telling you what I know as opposed to what I don't know? To tell you that I know that football is a reflection of the competitive spirit of especially the Western man is to tell you that regarding football, I know that one thing, but everything else in the world, if that was one fact in the Library of Congress, if that was one volume, I know that volume. The rest of it, I don't know squat. If you're going to bring up, or God worse, if I'm going to bring up to me any other question about pro football, I'm done for. Because I've just told you what I know. There's the contrast. I now know that it's more than just a game. It's more than just a sport. It is a kind of psychological reflection of the competitive spirit of man. And it's the second guy, which of course the second guy sitting at the counter can be your guy. The second guy says, well, I don't think that's true because we're no longer engaged in hand-to-hand combat here. We live in the city. I'm not in that kind of physical competition with you or anybody else in my business or any other business. Now back to the first guy. He goes to the first guy. What's he going to do? He's told everything he knows about pro football. Now if you're going to let voices argue and say, well, he could say more, he could say, well, the Giants didn't do that well last year. We're not talking about that. You're missing it. There is no objective knowledge about football. There's no way to gauge it. This man, this organism sitting there that has thinking, talking, and feeling molecules at work in him, began to talk about what he knows about football. And what he knows is what he said. Now your voices might want to put it this way, that he said what he considers to be the most important thing he knows about football. The inclusive statements, the shorthand wrap-up of I'll tell you what I know about football. It is a psychological reflection of the still prevailing, the still active, hunting, competitive spirit of man. And that's it. So the contrast is I've told you what I know as opposed to what I don't know, because anything else about football I don't know. Right now, anything else about anything I don't know, because my mind's on this. If he wants to say, well, I tell you what, I didn't keep up with football for a long time until I read the book and pointed out that football is actually a psychological or sociological manifestation and large reflection of the macroscopic internal competitive spirit among man. And he looks back at the second guy, like I told you, about football. And the second guy says, did you see the tits on that waitress? No, he didn't. One thing, my good man, at a fucking time. I told you everything I know, and now you've changed the subject. I don't know that until I realize we've changed the subject. And then I have to look and see if I can deal with this subject. The contrast has changed. Let me ask you a few more things. Could somebody get me one of these? I'll stay in the general neighborhood with some of this. Let me ask you something else. Why is it, I'll just use ordinary terminology right quick. Why is it that men seem to, in the yellow circuit areas, having to do with yellow brain stuff, why is it that humanity has words to distinguish between two distinct kinds of distinct kinds of yellow circuit stuff, such as it would apparently be between the objective and the subjective, as they would call it in the city. And the most direct words I would suggest to you would be, in the yellow circuit area, the words they would have would be fact versus opinion. And in the city, this makes sense. In the city, you got to deal with that. You got to deal with it. If you're in the city, you got to deal with it when the city is in you. Humanity has always had, in all languages, where the yellow circuit finally gets running up to speed, this distinction that there is, in yellow circuit activity, mental activity, there are more objective attitudes, stances, positions, views, and then they're more subjective. And thus we have words for the two. That if a man is being more intellectually objective, we can say, well, by and large, he's dealing with facts. If we get into areas where obviously he's just becoming subjective, we can't call them facts anymore. He may be saying they're facts, but they're opinions. Comma. Humanity has all that, but I want to know. I want to know why there is no such distinction for blue circuit activity. Damn it, I want to know. And I want to know in a hurry. All right, that was fast enough. Why is there no such case? Why are there no words? Why are there no attitudes? Why there is apparently no intellectual distinction ever been made? There's got to be some kind of parallel. If this is true, if this is worthwhile, if this is meaningful, if it has any validity, which it obviously does, it would not have lasted all this time and permeated every so-called culture and epoch of man, that yellow activity stuff can either be factual or opinionated. It can be objective or subjective. All right, let's just agree. I'll agree. Be done with it. I'll agree that in the city it has purpose, validity, and some value. So if that be true, why is there not a like situation in the blue circuit? Why are there not apparently, well, what it amount to, like real feelings, factual feelings, and then opinion feelings? And of course, you do understand what, surely you do, when I was referring to the opening shot there of the yellow circuit area, that one is preferable. If we're going to deal with yellow circuit, we're going to deal with the activities of the mind, then objective activity, that is, the output of facts, is preferable to a subjective use of the mind of somebody just giving you their opinion. I mean, sometimes you can't be helped. Sometimes people are like that, I guess. But for sure, one of them is preferable. Why is there no parallel of any kind in the great, wide, wonderful world of human emotion? That there is objective emotion and subjective emotion. There's some kind of words similar to that. There's nothing even close. Think about it. And of course, you really think about it and you get married up in it, you could then even ask yourself, well, all right, is there any in the red circuit? But, as they say in the city, one thing at a time. Before I leave that paragraph about why is there, you remember the question, why is there no apparent parallel, nothing even remotely similar in the field of human emotion, about there being an objective and subjective classifications of feeling. Let me end with just a little comment. The more the ambiguity, the greater the contrast. Now, think about it. Well, we got 5 minutes. One that I was sure I could taste it did not hit enough of you as some meetings back I was pointing out that the view of the so-called conspiracies between powers, between factors, between parts of we, between members of the people, that could be seen as conspiracy from one view and one level would be otherwise from another. Listen, let us take good old man the factory. A factory with men working in it. You could have some workers begin to strongly suspect, begin to discuss it, some of them agree. They begin to suspect that at some mid-management level, their immediate supervisors are engaged in some kind of conspiracy, such as several possibilities. Over here is Section A that puts together some part of the automobile, the piece of equipment. And over here is Section B that has to do the final adjustments. Some of them begin to suspect that their immediate supervisors, let's call it mid-management, are engaged in a kind of conspiracy that continues to keep a kind of threatening atmosphere between these two sections. That is, the original section of the assemblers, if you people do not work faster so that the wrap-up and adjustment crew can get their jobs done, we're going to have to fire some of you. The people over here are working faster. Some of them begin to suspect. Some of them go over and listen in their spare time, and they hear that the supervisor of the final adjustment section is telling their people, listen, do you realize that they could be working faster over there in assembly, that it's us holding things up? Some of you people, you may have had some longevity around here, but if you think you've got unconditional tenure, you're mistaken. You can be let go, and those people are just biting at the bridle over here to work faster, and in fact, they're being threatened with some layoffs. They want to produce more. That's one kind of potential conspiracy. Or they could see it as a kind of conspiracy going on even, that now management is beginning to make a kind of continuing threat over the possibility of either unionizing the shop, letting it be unionized, or, in some cases, striking out the union on the basis that our particular city here, we interpret it now, has the absolute right to work law, and so we may let in anybody. We may be firing a whole lot of you union people because it's gotten out of hand, the salaries. There is simply a continuing feeling of an overhanging smog of threat. And some of the workers right down there on the assembly floor begin to suspect that this is all a kind of sham, that they're making us different sections feel like we're at each other's throat, we're in competition, we may lose our jobs unless we do this or that, or they're always having some kind of competition up here with a scoreboard and who's producing the most and then who is checking the most and getting it out the door and shipping, and we always feel like it's a contest going on more than us just working, or we feel like it's a contest that they're going to bring in a union that will immediately make us work harder and going to set up stringent rules, or if they're already a union, they're threatening to bust the union. It's been going on for as long as I can remember. They're threatening to bring in or to help introduce legislation in our city for right-to-work laws where the union will have no power. It's always a thing of some kind of threat, and some of these workers believe it's a conspiracy. They're just making it up. You got me. Let's say that there's some basis for that. Now, ownership upstairs. They look down at what mid-management has done, if they in fact did what I was describing that the workers suspect, or some of them suspect. Do you understand that the owners would look down upon this as being a splendid arrangement? Beautiful. They would hand out awards, trips to the Bermuda for these people. They would see no nefarious, underhanded conspiracy going on. And I don't mean through any kind of intellectual or verbal rationalization. They would look at as this as the height of efficiency. What would seem to be dastardly, underhanded acts at one level can be seen as absolute models of efficiency from another. Now, of course, you know I'm not actually talking about factories and assembly plants and unions. And so I can say that you might ponder that this difference, that is that in all kinds of circumstances, at one level, from one view, you could see what was taking place as being underhanded, dastardly, or at least severely questionable. And yet from another view, at another level, it would be seen as being a model of efficiency. That kind of contrast. Could you see that as being perhaps the difference between the views that life has of itself and the views that life has of man? If that is too cosmic, could you see that perhaps that contrast would be the difference between an ordinary man's view of himself and a revolutionist view of himself? We're out of time.